Welcome back to the Brownie Points podcast covering this week's unfortunate loss to the Denver Broncos. Our segments today are going to be, first, a big takeaway / key moments in the game. Then we're going to have our Brownie Points segment, which is basically our reward segment to the standout players on offense and to the standout players on defense. Following that, we're going to have our story of the week segment, which this week is yet again, who should start, P.J Walker or Joe Flacco? Following that, we're going to have our look ahead episode where we preview the Browns game versus the Browns next Sunday. So, starting off with your big takeaway.
My thought is this a sign of problems? And I'm speaking on the defensive end. Or is this just one of those they laid an egg games? And if you look, like, this happens. Like, in 2020, the Browns laid an egg against the Steelers, late a little later in the year. Absolute egg. Got destroyed. But then, it wasn't really a problem for that team. And if you look, a lot of teams do this. Even really good teams will just have a game where they just randomly are terrible. And it's weird, and it happens, and you move on. Sometimes it's a real problem. And when the Browns played the Colts, it felt like a fluky game. So I wasn't super concerned about it. When you looked at the way they played, it makes you a little nervous, sure, but at the same time you thought, okay, there's a good chance that they're going to rebound, though, because the whole game was super fluky. And even when they were scoring, a lot of them were off big plays, which can make you nervous, but a lot of times big plays come down to a miscommunication here, a miscommunication there. And so it's less bad plays. There's less instances of problems, which means a lot of times it's something that can be fixed a lot more easily and a lot of times more of a bad game type of deal, as opposed to what happened this past Sunday. This past Sunday, they got beat up. For the first time this year, I really have not seen it this year, where our defensive interior got owned. I did not see that against the Colts. Like, they ran well, whatever. But nobody, just dominated. They dominated. They ran down our throats. That is scary to see. And the score was, honestly, it could have been worse. The fumble by JOK, because JOK played awesome, which we're going to get into, but JOK with that big fumble helped. And those penalties were well-timed, and luckily that killed one of their drives because they were moving. Now, penalties are penalties, but the point is, it never really felt like we came in there and just shut them down. Like, they were moving the ball almost every single drive with ease, shoving it down our throats and then getting a couple nice throws in and just moving and moving and moving and moving. And that is a scary sight. Now, again, it could just be one of those games. You're a little off. You're not feeling right that week. You head up to Denver. The air quality, it's a little thin up there, can get to you and just have one of those weird games. And to be fair, the Broncos did have a 4-game win streak coming into this game. So they were on fire and playing a little better. They started off bad, but they've been playing really, really well lately. A couple big wins coming in to this game. So, let's be fair here. They just come off back-to-back victories. Again, they 4 in a row, but back-to-back. They beat the Chiefs by a good amount, and everybody's like, oh, okay, that's fluky. But then they came out and beat the Bills. We're like, okay, but the Bills have had some bad games. But it's like, okay, but that's 2 in a row. And then they actually beat they actually came out there and they beat the Vikings, who had been playing really, really well and were hot. And they just barely beat them. And it was like, okay. But, the Browns have such good defense. They should keep it in range. And then they really owned the defense. So that was very worrying to see. And it just makes you come away thinking, is this going to be a problem moving forward? Did they crack some code? Is there something that happened that's going to be a problem moving forward? Because one thing I'll say about this defense is, and this is something that you don't come across a lot, so I don't want to just say it's necessarily going to be a problem, but I don't feel like we faced a prolific offensive passing attack yet. I don't think we faced a prolific passing attack. Joe Burrow was clearly not right at the beginning of this year.
What about the Niners? They got a pretty good passing attack. Oh, that's true.
The next couple games he struggled when he was out. And then they went back to being prolific when he came back in. If it wasn't for that additional evidence, I might agree with you. But because of that, essentially you didn't end up facing one. Otherwise it would be, I would agree. And then now you will face some attacks that are pretty good. You are going to face the Texans, who have been a pretty good passing attack this year, and the Jaguars, who have pretty good passing attacks. So you're going to face some down the road. We'll see what happens there, and we'll see, again, hopefully, this is not a problem going forward. There's a chance it's just one of those eggs, but you do wonder a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully. Let's say hopefully it was one of those eggs, because, like you said, there's going to be one per year. So maybe this is that one game. For me, my big takeaway was sloppy. This was a sloppy game for the Browns. And that's something you really hate to see, especially when just the last couple weeks, we've been kind of tooting Kevin Stefanski's horn a little bit, saying that, like, hey, he's been a little underrated this year, and he's actually been doing a pretty good job. I'm not going to say that he did a poor job today. There were moments and things that you could question, like how well they really utilized the run game, considering they're playing one of the worst run defenses in the league. You can get into that. But this game was sloppy. They had 5 drops, which is unacceptable, obviously, but 5 drops is crazy. You can't have that. And 5 fumbles. 5 fumbles, 5 drops. You're not going to win a game when you do that. And that was the case in this game, too. And those were crucial points. Like, on that 2-point conversion, that drop ball, that was a really well-designed trick play that got a guy wide open, dropped the ball. Okay, that was 2 points. But still, that would have tied the game, and that does change things. Then we had that another trick play where the guy dropped the ball, fumbled it in the back, and the Broncos picked it up. They marched down the field, scored a touchdown that put this game further out of reach and just made it just that much more difficult to bring that game in. And those are the moments that killed us. Those are things you can't have when you're playing with a guy like DTR in there, who's kind of a little inconsistent, right? Like one drive he's hitting everybody, the next drive he can't hit someone 3 yards away from him. That's just what DTR is right now, at least. You can't have those kinds of plays. And you could pinpoint all those drop balls and all those fumbles and how many of them directly led to points or us not getting points. And I think those drop balls and those fumbles was the difference in that game. I think that is ultimately why we lost. So for me, that's my big takeaway, and I think that's the only takeaway. Now, and that I think was also like my key moment from that game. I think that was the pivotal moment. That drop ball when we had it inside their 50, and then we had that fumble, and the Broncos come down and they score a touchdown, and now it kind of felt out of reach at that point, or it kind of felt that was the point where you're like, all right, it's probably unlikely the Browns win this game. That to me was that pivotal moment, that fumble right there.
Yeah, I mean, I'm more or less in agreement on that. I do think one thing to keep in mind is that they haven't been sloppy all year, and therefore it's more likely that the sloppy aspect will be a one-timer. Stefanski's done a good job of coaching this team for the most part, so I'm going to give him a little slack here and say, look,
I agree.
Sometimes teams have a sloppy one. Certainly something you don't want to see happen again. Then you start raising eyebrows. But one time he gets a bit of a pass, and you get a right to earn a pass.
And the drop balls weren't Kevin Stefanski's fault. Like a lot of those plays there was nothing wrong with the play being drawn up. They just dropped the ball.
No, it's when it becomes a systemic issue. When teams are systemically sloppy, it is the coach's fault. Like when a lot of guys are randomly dropping balls, and then you see like and then there'll be like fumbles and this happening all the time. When it starts happening consistently, like different players are having issues and stuff, it's generally a coaching problem. So that way it can be, but since it's one game of weirdness, I'm not going to put him there. Again, I do agree that was very strange, our approach to the run game, but that was rough. Especially the strangest one to me was not converting late in the second half. And I did tweet about this, but they had 3 attempts and plenty of time and 2 timeouts. So they had 2 timeouts. So they had, it was like, I think it was like 40 seconds or so. But with 2 timeouts, that's plenty of time. You're first and goal, you're right there. They didn't run it one time. Which I thought was bizarre. Like, you've got this guy who's killing it for you, and you're down there, and you got the timeouts anyway. Wouldn't you use the run game? They didn't try to once, and they left 2 timeouts up on the board and then take their field goal. It felt strange at times, but for the most part, I'm not going to hold that to them. The big moment for me, I think there's 2 pivotal moments. Number one is that is what I just mentioned, is them not running for it, leaving 2 timeouts on the board instead of using them when it's the end of the half anyway, making use of them. No, it didn't. Instead, this is what they went with. Just tried to just have DTR pass the ball, didn't go through, you don't convert, and you just knew your defense wasn't at its top tier. You were going to need some touchdowns to win the game. And when they didn't get that one, it was devastating. And then the second one is the one you mentioned, right? At that point in the third quarter, it kind of goes out of reach. But again, like, I do think you have to look back at the end of the half too, because not converting, when you know you're not at your top, you need to convert your opportunities. And when you get that close, you have to convert, and they didn't.
Yeah, I think the thing for Kevin Stefanski, like when it came to that run game situation, I think Kevin was trying to think like in 4D. I think that he knew he knows that the Broncos know that they had a terrible defense, and I think he knew that they were expecting the Browns to try and run the ball because we have a good running game and they have a bad running defense. And I think he tried to get a step ahead of that because he was like, we actually have some confidence in DTR, and we're going to let him pass the ball a little bit. And I think that's kind of what happened, is why we didn't really see that many runs from the Browns, because I think he was trying to, think 3 steps ahead. That's what I think what they were trying to do. And at times it kind of worked in their favor. Like, there were open guys a lot, but DTR wasn't really hitting them that often. Ultimately, in retrospect, they should have been running the ball from the beginning.
Ultimately, you have a guy who's averaging 7 yards a carry, but also coming into this, the Broncos were the worst run defense in the league. And you might think, oh, it's just that Broncos game, with the Dolphins game when they gave up 70 points. But if you actually look, every other game besides the Broncos, the Dolphins game, there was only one game, week 1. It was the only week that they did not give up over 4 yards per carry to the running back. And typically it was 5, 6, 7 yards a carry, sometimes 9. I even saw 9 at one point. Like, they were just giving up yards in bunches to every running back. You've got Jerome Ford, who's playing really, really well. It has felt like they've underutilized Ford the last couple of weeks. So I did feel like that was a little mind-boggling. Hopefully he does, and he's made more adjustments this year than the past. So hopefully he does make a little bit of an adjustment that, look, it's one thing not to over rely on your run game. When you're playing the worst run defense, take advantage of what they have, and then work on your pass game a little more than they might suspect. But do not underutilize your run game. I don't want to see 9 carries for Ford, in that situation. So I do think he did a little 4D chess, kind of big brained himself right out of some easy wins there. So it is what it is. You're in a difficult situation, so it is a little more understandable.
Yeah, absolutely. But whatever. But we can always, hindsight is 2020, right? We'll see what he does next week, and we'll judge him from there, and we will judge. But let's talk about the standout players in that game. Not that there were too many, but talking about our brownie points, and for our first-time listeners, brownie points is our reward segment, as I said at the beginning. So we're going to give out 3 brownie points, 2 brownie points, and 1 brownie points to the standout players in offense, and then we'll do the same thing on defense. Sometimes we don't give out any brownie points at 3 or 2 or 1. It's all up to our discretion. It's our podcast. We make up the rules. All right, who do you got at 3, 2, and 1 brownie points on offense?
Okay, so on offense, I've got nobody at 3. I just don't think anybody stood out quite enough for long enough to get 3. 3 does mean something, and look, it just wasn't there. Everybody kind of struggled most part at some extent, or did not get enough opportunity. Which brings me to number 2, which is not enough opportunity. Jerome Ford. We mentioned him. He played well. He did play really well. He put up 7 yards a carry. It felt like when they gave him the ball, he was finding the hole like he's been doing all season. He was just putting up multiple. He went back-to-back, like, first-yard runs. Like, he was just looking, finding his zone and just pushing for it. I love how he always falls forward. Even when he's going down, he doesn't have a lot of room. He finds the point to hit the tacklers in between at a certain point, so he'll get 2 more yards out of it. He does really well with that, and I really appreciate it. I think he's really good. He's got phenomenal vision, and it's kind of like that quarterback. Some quarterbacks, they at a certain point they just tuck their heads and run, but some quarterbacks still look downfield. He always does that. Even when he's in the middle of making his run, he'll keep his eyes open for additional holes that will open up later, and then you'll see him shift his feet and find a hole mid-run. He's 3 yards past the line of scrimmage, so his patience and vision have been very helpful. He's been really, really good this year. It's been a real eye-opener, been a lot of fun to watch. He's really been a major role in why this team is not falling apart without Chubb. And he definitely deserves kudos. Unfortunately, he got 9 carries, and it's a little hard to give out 3 stars for that. But he did really, really well with the opportunities he was given, so he definitely deserves 2. 1 star is somebody new to this list who really is new to the Browns in terms of both being a rookie and in terms of getting opportunities to show what he can do. That'd be Cedric Tillman. You definitely see that DTR and Tillman they practice together. That's the thing. DTR is newer to playing with the 1s, but he played with the 2s a lot, and he went to rookie minicamp with the other rookies too. So he has the most experience with the rookie receiver, like the young guys who were there with him in rookie minicamp and played with him all those snaps, right? All those snaps when they had to earn their way out of third team to second team was with him, and then they got rid of Dobbs. So all this season he's been taking second team snaps with Tillman, and you could see that chemistry. Now, again, I would have liked to see him get back involved later in the game, especially when you're looking back, I'm like, okay, we're having some offensive struggles. Let's try to go back to like run the ball and get Tillman involved because Tillman had been doing well and is clearly a comfort receiver for DTR. I would have liked to see them try to do something of that nature to try to get things back on track as like a back on track mechanism before things really got out of control. But Tillman did do really well with every opportunity given, 4 for 55. He did make some plays after the catch, and he looked intriguing. And it was really nice, as a rookie, like, hey, rookie offense, hey, like offensive player who can play. I haven't seen a lot of that from the skill positions, at least. And yeah, it's good to see DPJ's gone, so it's good to see someone step up in that slot. And it was nice. It was nice. I would like to see more in the coming weeks. We'll see, partially, of course, depending upon who's playing quarterback. So that's my take, and those are my offensive people that I'm giving brownie points to. What about you?
Yeah, I just want to comment on that real quick because while it was nice to see that Cedric Tillman exists on the roster again, because you kind of forgot about that, I actually think that the rapport that DTR had with Cedric Tillman was actually to the detriment of the offense. Not at first, but there were a number of plays where he forced the ball to people that he shouldn't have when Amari Cooper was wide open. We know how good of a route runner Amari Cooper is, and there's at least a few times in game where he's wide open, and Amari Cooper was not involved, which to me, if Amari Cooper doesn't get more targets, doesn't get at least like 5 targets, you're not reading like the play properly, because Amari was probably open more often, and he was. Like if you go back and look at that tape, especially that ball that he threw to the back corner of the end zone, Amari Cooper was wide open. I don't say wide open, but he had some space. He should have gone to Amari Cooper. Amari Cooper's your number one. He should be the guy you're looking to first, especially if you're a rookie receiver, because he's the most likely to give you space. Now, however, Cedric Tillman also had some space, and he did a nice job finding him, and that's good, but it was a little bit of a detriment there. Did you want to?
I just want to mention that is probably part of the game plan, though, how they're running the offense. Like, he isn't trusting DTR to do read offenses, so it probably is very specific 1-2 read type decisions a lot in the playbook and how they want to run the offense that week with DTR. So I do suspect that part of that is the way they're running the offense with DTR because they don't trust him to be able to handle those decisions and go through an entire read.
Yeah, I mean, there definitely could be. But talking about my brownie points for the offense, at 3 brownie points, I agree with you. Nobody was really a standout. Nobody, you looked at that game and thought, oh, what a player. You did think that with Jerome Ford, but he didn't have enough opportunities, as he said. But every time he touched the ball, he was great. So for me, I also give him 2 brownie points. And at 1 brownie point, I'm giving that also to Cedric Tillman. I just want to give him that shout out. I don't think Cedric Tillman was otherworldly, but he was decent in that game, and he actually showed up for the first time in his career, in his NFL career, really. So, I mean, this was his career game. Hopefully, we'll see more from him going forward, although we've seen P.J. Walker and Cedric Tillman on the field at the same time. And Cedric Tillman didn't really exist when that was happening, so who knows? We'll see. But that's what I got for my brownie points on offense. And who do you got for your brownie points on defense?
On defense, at 3, I have JOK. I mean, JOK played phenomenal. He had 12 tackles. He was all over the field. He had a big sack. And I love that it was late in the game. He was really just showing that he's still putting in the effort. And you never know, like, weird stuff happens. Scooping scores, pick sixes, things happen. You never know how things will work out. And he's a guy who's not going to give up. And he had a huge sack. He looked awesome. He had a 4th fumble that was huge earlier on in the game. We're having trouble getting stops. And they were marching down the field, and he gets a big 4th fumble. Unfortunately, the rest of the team didn't rally with him. That's not his fault. He did everything he could. He looked really good. He's definitely gearing up for a nice contract coming his way at some point, from someone at least. He looked great. I mean, he was every inch that second rounder that we drafted. That's what he looked like. Everything we were hoping he would be. Unfortunately, that wasn't the week that the rest of the defense showed up, but he's been coming on strong this year, and he's really showing what he can do, and he's developed nicely. And I thought it was really impressive this week too, not just because he was so good, but because the interior was struggling this week. And even though he's really built to shoot gaps with a good interior, the interior was struggling, and he still made a lot of big plays. So that, I think, is really commendable. 2 brownie points, I have nobody. Again, most of his defense was terrible. 1, I do have Garrett. He made a couple nice plays. He did have that swatted ball. He had some nice moments. He wasn't completely gone. So I will give him 1. He's definitely had a phenomenal year. He definitely is in that Defensive Player of the Year conversation. But for the most part, nobody else deserves it. Most of the team is just getting bullied most of the game. The secondary didn't do very well. Whenever they did pass, it didn't seem like they were really having issues. And we got ran over in the run game. So I'm just not really in the mood to hand out a whole bunch of accolades, and most of them were terrible. But those are the people who get at least any love from me. Who are your defensive players?
I mean, unfortunately for third-party listeners, there's not a whole lot of exciting disagreement here today. At 3 Brownie Points, I also got JOK. He was like a heat-seeking missile on some of those plays. I talk about this every week. We talk about JOK, but the speed and power that he has on some plays are awesome to watch. Like that quickness and power when he tackles, he really gets you. I love watching him play. So that's how I got at 3 Brownie Points, and at 2 Brownie Points, also nobody else really stood out to me much. And the only other player that really deserves much of anything, I think, was Myles Garrett. He had some pressures. He was able to get that batted ball. Apparently, he got injured as well, so that's cool. Just another injury to the Browns tally. So that sucked. But
so just one additional thought I had. I 100% agree, but just on the topic of JOK, with him doing so well and everything, I think his next step in his evolution will be in coverage. If he can step it up a notch, imagine if he could also erase tight ends, like those good tight ends. He's big enough and athletic enough that he could actually be a really good cover man on some of those really tough to cover tight ends. And if he can go out there and show, then now he could be your spy. He could be a guy who shoots gaps, and he can erase like talented matchup problem tight ends. Sky's the limit on him.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, he's going to get paid a lot of money, I think, when his contract's up. And if he could do something like that, he's going to get paid. He's really going to get paid even more. But speaking of injuries, our backup quarterback went down again. DTR took that hit from Block, I think it was. Yeah, lowered a shoulder into him and took DTR out. And DTR wasn't exactly a world beater in that game. But the difference from DTR to P.J. Walker in that game was pretty clear. Because P.J. Walker was terrible in that time that he stepped onto the field. There was not much happening. He had one good throw. Yeah. And that was a good throw. And I was like, okay, all right, let's see what happens. And then after that, it was pretty much all downhill. It was pretty bad. To be fair, the Broncos was getting a ton of pressure. So, like, he didn't really have a whole lot of time. But basically, we thought that, all right, they're rolling with DTR for the rest of the week. But now, of course, he gets injured. So we have to ask ourselves this question again, which we do every single week. It feels like this entire season somehow, despite us having a $50 million quarterback, we shouldn't be having these questions. It's the whole reason we got this guy. And yet we are asking this question every week. Who should start next week? Obviously, it won't be DTR, we assume. P.J. Walker or Joe Flacco?
So first of all, I think PJ got a little bit of dirt there at the end of the game. It kind of more felt like he was walking into just like the end of a disaster, and everything was kind of collapsing around him. So I don't think it was all on PJ, and it can be hard to walk into that situation, and because you can't also just you can't just take your time and hit some dink and dunks. You need a bunch of really big plays. You can't just come in there. Like, the situation demands big plays right away. So I thought it was a little unfair, and he did have one really great play, and then things kind of went down. But I think the whole team was kind of falling apart at that point. So I don't completely put that on him. And I put more on what he'd done in his previous starts for the Browns, which was pretty good. There was more picks than I would like, but he also, arguably, we've had our best offensive production this year also while he's been under center. The only time we came close was Deshaun Watson that second half against the Ravens. Besides that, it's been our best production. It's been with PJ. So I got to say, I'm definitely leaning PJ. Some people are bringing up Joe Flacco. This is a classic case of just nostalgia, of remembering the guy he used to be. Go watch him with the Jets. Go watch him in his most recent years. He is awful. I mean, he's terrible. It happens. Guys get older, and it's a couple of years since then. He only got worse, I promise you. He didn't suddenly get better. It's going to get ugly. He's just not a good quarterback anymore. Okay, PJ isn't world class. I'm not pretending he is, but he's played for you. He knows your playbook well. He's solid enough. Just try to work on itching it out a little bit. Try to make some tweaks and try to avoid some of the picks, and roll with him. That would be my take on it.
Yeah, when I think about this. I know, and if you're a viewer or listener who wants the Browns to start Joe Flacco, ask yourself this: how many times in NFL history, or even NBA history, or any sports history that I can think of, at least, don't get me about hockey, I don't know anything about hockey, how many times has a guy, an old player, retired, or not retired, but not been on a team for how long? A year? Come back and then been serviceable? In the NFL, that doesn't happen. Yeah, he was out of the league for a reason. because people didn't think he was that good. He's not suddenly going to be great. And yes, for Browns fans especially, I think it's easier to fall into the trap because Joe Flacco had like one good game, and that was against the Browns, where he had like 300 yards and like 4 touchdowns or something like that against the Browns when he was on the Jets. So I think for us, maybe if you weren't watching him, you might think, well, he wasn't that bad. He was only good in that game, really. Overall, he wasn't that great. And again, there's a reason why he wasn't signed. Guys aren't signed for a reason. Almost always. It's pretty rare, and especially not a really old guy. The old guys never retire, come back, and then play well. Look at Phillip Rivers, like towards the end of his career. What a mess that was. They kept trying to trot him out because he's got experience and he was good and blah, blah. And it was such a mess.
And he's still way better than what Flacco was recently.
Yeah. It's not a good idea. It's tempting. It's really tempting because he's a name and you think he was good at one time. He was decent, like blah, blah, blah. Maybe he could just manage the game, be like Peyton Manning on the Broncos and whatever. Obviously, nobody's saying he's Peyton Manning, but like that type of a situation, it's probably going to be a lot worse than that. P.J. Walker doesn't give us a great chance to win every week, but I do think he gives us a better chance than Joe Flacco.
Yeah, and keep in mind, the Jets lost their starting quarterback this year. They had the most recent experience with him, and they did not even call him for a workout. That's got to say something, because they were not staring down a beautiful bear, which I know they're a mess because they're starting Tim Boyle instead of when everyone told them to go get a quarterback. That's their problem. But the fact that he didn't even work out Joe Flacco tells you all you need to know about the guy. He's not where he was.
Yeah, I think the Browns picked him up, not because they were thinking, hey, let's start this guy. They signed him to a practice squad contract for a reason. I think they wanted him in the room to be a mentor and just to be there at the back end, because you got to have somebody.
You got to have somebody, and yeah, I think to maybe try to give DTR some help with the experience angle. He's been around for a really, really long time.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so let's look ahead to next week. So let's assume that P.J. Walker is going to be our quarterback, because that's what we decided, and the Browns listen to this podcast, almost for sure. Yeah, but looking ahead to next week, the Browns game against the Rams.
So this is a little tricky. The Rams have been a little resurgent in recent weeks. They're coming off back-to-back wins. Now the Seahawks, to be fair, the Seahawks, Geno Smith got injured in the middle of the game. So it definitely played a role, for sure, in their comeback win. But they did get it. And then they just beat up on the Cardinals, I apologize. Now the Cardinals aren't all that good, but do keep in mind they only give up 14 points, which, I mean, the whole thing is, can their defense play? Because they have a good offense, actually, when Stafford's healthy. We saw early in the year with Puka Nacua and of course, I'm blanking.
On the Rams?
Yeah.
Cooper Kupp,
yeah. Of course, they have a dynamic offense with Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp, but their defense had been having some major issues. They only give 14 points. Keep in mind, this is not the Clayton Tune-led Cardinals with no running back in the backfield. This is James Conner at running back. This is Kyler Murray at quarterback, not even his first week back. And not that they're like super dynamic, but they really beat up on them. And the Rams look like they're finding their form, and Stafford looks healthy. So it's interesting. This is actually going to be a bit of a test on the passing attack angle. It's hard to say exactly where they're at just now, but you look at Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp. Stafford can sling the ball, so you've got some testing on that angle. Kyron Williams has been a solid running back since they've been playing him. Not spectacular, but not as bad as Rams running attacks of years past. So this is a little bit of a test here. It's a team that's coming out a little hot. Can you cool them down? Can you get back on track? You're going to fall apart a little bit. Let's see, can this defense, hey, get back on track. Do what you do. Show them, hey, it's just 1 week. And, your offense, just keep it steady and win the game. Or is this the beginning of a slide? And very often, we forget about these things, or we look at everything as pivotal or not pivotal based on how it played out throughout the year. But in those moments, it's what happens in the next game that makes it pivotal or not pivotal. They call it just an egg game. Well, it's an egg game because that's how they took it and played it the next week better. And then you didn't end up in a slide mentally where everything's going wrong. Whereas, teams do slide and think, oh, that's clearly the pivotal game, and they just fell apart. Well, that's because of how they dealt with it. So this is a mental test for the team, because this is the first time it felt like, wow, you just got owned since the Ravens game. And even then, it kind of felt like, fine, we just lost our quarterback. And, we got stuck with his backup, wasn't ready, and it was the Ravens. So this is a big moment. Playoffs are tight. You need this. I'm trying to think of it. As far as score prediction, it's really tough for me to say anything. But my prediction is 26 20-21 Browns victory.
Wow. Okay, that's pretty optimistic. I think the Rams are putting it back together. They are a well-coached team. Sean McVay knows what he's doing. I think this game is pivotal for the season. I think this game is like you were saying, this is gonna determine whether the Browns are sliding as a result of everything that's happened with injuries and the position that they're in now, or are they gonna hold it together enough to make the playoffs? And I think this next game is gonna decide that. If the Browns win this game, I think they make the playoffs, and I think if they lose this game, I would bet on them to blow it in the second half of the season and not make the playoffs. I don't think this game is gonna go well for them. I think that the defense has shown some faltering. And yes, that was against the Broncos. And again, we don't know if that was just an egg, but the Broncos are a pretty well-coached team. Sean Payton is a pretty good offensive mind. It's also a pretty good offensive mind is Sean McVay. If someone's going to carve up his defense, it's typically great offensive minds. Sean McVay is definitely that guy. I think that they're going to do pretty well against our defense, especially if Myles Garrett can't come back and play next week, especially if Denzel Ward has another week where he doesn't come back and play. Because that's something else to talk about against the Broncos. Like, Denzel Ward was out, and that makes a big difference. We have good other cover corners, but Greg is supposed to cover the number twos for a reason. We want Denzel Ward there. So who knows how much of a difference that really makes, because that ripple effect can be pretty difficult to calculate. But in this game, I think if Denzel Ward is out and Myles Garrett is out as well, I think the Browns are going to lose this game, and I don't think it's going to be pretty. I think we're going to have another ugly, difficult game to watch, and I think the Browns are going to end up losing this one 27-16. I think they're going to get into the opposing territory a few times, but I think they're going to end up settling for field goals, and they're not going to be able to convert touchdowns. That's what I think is going to happen in that game. It's unfortunate, and obviously it's not what I want. Hopefully I'm wrong, but that's what I think is going to happen. I don't know if you had anything you wanted to tag on to that. Within
range. I could see it playing out that way. I'm being a little hopeful, hoping that P.J. Walker brings back some of that magic, and I think he'll make some mistakes, but if the defense can alter it a bit, then we'll be all right. So I'm hoping for some of that comeback magic. But I will say that I will say that I am a little nervous about it, and I will say that if they do decide to start Joe Flacco, I think it ends disastrously.
Yeah, I agree with you there. Joe Flacco would be a big mistake, and we'll find out if the Browns make that mistake. Who knows?
We'll discuss it with you next week.
Yeah, I think Joe Flacco is full of gold. That's going to wrap up our episode. Yeah, we'll see you next week. Thank you for listening.